ago, everything was growing inside. Backed up months ago.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Okay, so as I said last week, I've not got many days off now before the end of the year, so the plan is to sort of get the last couple of episodes of the show for the year done. Obviously one today and one at the weekend, so the Christmas episode will be the one at the weekend, and quite looking forward to that. I think it's going to be something quite special. Not that today's episode of the show isn't special. All my episodes of the show are special, aren't they? Anyway, but today's episode of the show was obviously the episode I was going to do last week, but now I have the missing sample. So a big thank you to Highball Brands for the samples for today's episode of the show. Specifically to Craig. I can now do said episode, and it's a cognac episode, and I don't get the opportunity to do cognac episodes of the show very often. I mean, obviously lots of whiskey, but don't often get the chance to do them, so it's always nice to sort of look at them. And I guess when you think about cognac and Armagnac to a certain extent, one of the first words that kind of spring to mind is tradition. I mean, I can't think of any other spirit producing region in the world that is steeped in the tradition of cognac. I mean, I mean, you think that sort of the Scotch Whisky Association uses the term traditional as a bit of a stick to beat the sort of the Scotch producers, and to a certain extent restrict innovation, shall we say. They got nothing on these guys in cognac. I mean, the rules and regulations for cognac were set out in the Dark Ages. I mean, it is a highly, I mean, the whole of France, the sort of alcohol producing regions of France are all highly regulated, and I mean, essentially, as you well know, you've got the AOCs and things like that, and sort of demarcated vineyards, generally based along sort of soil and elevation and what have you, and you have the sort of the mad situation where literally sort of, hello, it's Barbie. You've been. Where have you been? So you've been breaking your brains under the radiator, haven't you? So anyway, so you have a situation where literally sort of the vineyard here can sell its wine for several hundred or €1,000 a bottle, and literally the vineyard next door is selling it for a few cents. It's sometimes it's completely illogical, and certainly I think if you go back to the time of the evolution of the AOC system, not only is it based upon terroir and the whole concept and all that kind of stuff, there's a political angle there as well, and but we're not really going to go there. It is what it is, isn't it? So but basically, coming back to cognac, where there is no innovation in reality in cognac, there is no room for doing anything different. I mean, can you imagine, Monsieur le cognac distiller basically goes up to the board of the cognac AOC and says, all right, I've decided to do something a bit different. I'm going to mature my spirit in first fill American oak casks, and then I'm going to finish it in ex-cloudberry wine casks. What do you think they're going to go? Mon Dieu! Oh no! I imagine would probably be the response. It's like you're not going to. No, you don't do things like that in the cognac region. It is so historical. It's so traditional. It hurts, and there is obviously very little room for innovation. But that doesn't mean that there is no innovation. Like the Scottish producers, you have to sort of innovate within the confines of the system, I suppose. And this is bringing us nicely on to the cognacs that I have in front of me today, produced by a producer called Fanny Fougerat. Now, obviously, as this is a French episode of the show, there's lots of French words, and it gives me the opportunity to mangle the hell out of them and probably upset a few people by my dreadful English pronunciation of French words. But anyway, I shall do my best, and please, no laughing at the back, okay? Anyway, so you're probably wondering what's the innovation, what's the take with Fanny's cognacs. Well, basically, just as a sort of like a rough rundown, she's the fourth generation cognac producer within her family, and the first to actually start bottling her own product. Prior to that, they would sell en vrac or in bulk to the big cognac houses in the region. And as you well know, the region is essentially run by the four big houses. And their production or their sales are so big that they just physically cannot produce enough of their own spirit, so they obviously buy in from the smaller producers that think, well, yeah, okay, well, we'll make the spirit and we'll sell it. It's a transaction, it's a job done. So basically, what Fanny is doing is, because she has vineyards, small holdings in both Borderies and Finois regions of cognac, she's looking at the concept of terroir, and you're probably thinking, well, what's so new about that? The whole region is laid out on the concept of terroir. You have Grand Champagne with its chalky soils and things like that, and then you've got the clayey sort of soils of Borderies, and they all produce a slightly different style of spirit, and you're probably thinking, well, yeah, okay, so what's the big deal with that? Well, to me, and a lot of it came to me when I was actually in the region, and I was tasting at the Armagnac company, Baron de Lustrac, who are the management company, and we were tasting a number of vintage dated Armagnacs, and basically up to about 25-30 years old, each of the particular bottlings had a nuance, they had a difference, but once you start to get above 30, generally they just tasted pretty much the same. They just tasted like old spirit. Nice old spirit, it has to be said, but the nuances had kind of got lost, and basically the people are obsessed with age and with cognacs being old. And the thing is with old cognacs is that the characteristic is about the oxidation, it's about the aging process, and you start to lose some of, in my personal opinion, some of the sort of nuances of the terroir of the region. So what it appears to me, I mean, yes, okay, you can argue that Borderies and Finois are regions that lend themselves to slightly earlier maturing cognacs as opposed to Grand Champagne. But it seems to me that sort of what Fanny is doing is not overly aging the spirit to allow the elements of the terroir to come through. So, for example, Borderies tends to sort of produce a sort of a lovely floral, sweet style of spirit, and Finois, for argument's sake, tends to be sort of more, in my opinion, crisp and minerally and sort of intense. I mean, and then you have Grand Champagne, which people say is where the best the best cognac comes from, and yes, you can argue that is indeed true, but it's like everything, isn't it? It's like every distiller. You have good distillers and you have not so good distillers, and it doesn't matter which region of the country or the sort of appellation they are. That's the thing, just because your vineyards and your production is Grand Champagne doesn't necessarily mean your Grand Champagne is brilliant. It could be distinctly ordinary. So anyway, this is not the only sort of innovative part of what Fanny Fougerat is doing. She's almost approaching the concept of bottling from like a whiskey. So not only is she concentrating on the concept of terroir and capturing that in her particular cuvées, she's bottling individual casks as well. So not only have you got the terroir element, you've got the nuances of the of individual cask bottling. So what she will do is select a parcel of casks. For example, in the first bottling, we'll be looking at the Petit Cigue. Hopefully I pronounced that relatively correctly. That is a selection of 15 barrels, and then each barrel is individually bottled. So obviously, so on the label, which is quite nice, you get the barrel number, you get the number of bottles, and it's this approach that I thought was just a little bit different and quite unique. And because, as you well know, cognac is all about the blending and the skill of blending, and I've tried to do it, and I can tell you it is not easy to do when you've got and I didn't have a particularly vast array of different ages to play with, you know, and so generally that's what you're doing. So you just don't tend to see single barrel bottlings that just don't seem to exist in reality. And so again, it's another really interesting thing that I think Fanny is doing, and it's, like I said, it's really appealed to me. And well, I'm hoping that the quality of the spirit is up to this, because after all, this innovation and, you know, doing things interesting, if your spirit is ordinary and not particularly interesting, it's, well, what's the point? But anyway, so I think that's enough waffling. I mean, you can find out more information on Fanny's website, although it is a little bit limited, should we say. But anyway, let's have a look at today's lineup then.
It's going wild, I can't even get through the night.
Right, okay, so we're going to kick off with the Petit Cigue, which I believe in French means small hemlock. Not quite sure what Fanny's getting at with the. I mean, I can't say I've ever smelt hemlock, so I don't know whether it features aromas of hemlock, or whether it's going to kill me, or is it part of a witch's potion? Maybe Fanny. I don't know. Well, I'm not quite sure. But anyway, it's a VSOP. It's 100% Uni Blanc from her vineyards in the Fin Bois. It's roughly about, it's 6 years old, not roughly about 6 years old, it is 6 years old, and like I said, it's a selection of 15 barrels, and each of the barrels is obviously bottled individually. The second bottling we'll be looking at is called, here we go, let's murder this one, Le Laurier d'Apollon, which I believe is the laurel of Apollo, or the translation of, and this is a single vintage in actual fact. This is from 2010, and it's again 100% Uni Blanc from Petit Champagne, and I believe the vineyards in Petit Champagne are owned by another member of the family, rather than Fanny herself. So this is a selection of 5 barrels. Oh, there we go. That have been aged for 8 years, and yeah. So that's the second bottling we'll be looking at. Bottling number 3 is an XO. This is called Iris Poivre, or Provier, which I think means peppered iris. Again, I'm assuming that these are references to sort of characters or the characteristics of the spirit, but I can't remember the last time I smelt an iris, to be honest with you, but we shall see what that's like when we get there. So again, 100% Uni Blanc, this time from the Bordeaux region, and which is, for those of you that don't know, in the north of Cognac. And This is 12 barrels, which is aged for 12 years. 15% of this particular bottling is initially aged in new oak for a year and then transferred obviously into older oak. So yeah, that could be interesting. And yeah, like I said, it's 12 years old. Fourth bottling we'll be looking at is called Cedre Blanc, which I believe means white cedar. This is again from her vineyards in the Finois. This time this is 2 barrels, so we are talking really small production here. 22 years old, and again 100% Uni Blanc. So that's the cognacs, and then I'm going to look at the 2 Pineau de Charentes that she does, because I don't often get to taste Pineau de Charentes, and for those of you that don't know, it's a fortified it's a fortified wine. It's normally the sort of the base wine from Uni Blanc or Colombard or whatever the grapes are, and it's fortified but with the cognac. So the first one is called Le Colibri de Fanny. It's 17%. It is no, it's not. It's Le Colibri Charmat. I do apologise. It's 100% Uni Blanc. It's 17%. Spends 12 months in Limousin barriques, and I believe that she uses 20% of her spirit to fortify that particular Pinot. And the last Pinot is the Le Colibri de Fanny, which is made from Merlot. Again, and I think exactly the same production as the Le Colibri. So there you go. That's today's episode of the show. Let's kick off with the bit of hemlock then, shall we? Right, okay, so let's see what the Petit Cigue gives us on the nose then, shall we? That's a lovely nose. Elegant, fresh, mineral, really delicate, quite appley. And again, sort of, like I was saying earlier, very subtle on the oxidised fruit notes. So I'm getting loads of that Finois character, that sort of mineraliness and freshness. There's a touch of honey. There's a slight floral note, which now, having, like I said, not smelt hemlock, it doesn't remind me of hemlock. I mean, the closest I can kind of get to it is a sort of honeysuckle, but not quite so honeyed. But you know, that's a gorgeous nose. It is not big, and it's not sort of like, you know, full of dried fruits and all that. It is elegant, delicate. Yeah, it's lovely, really nice. See what the part's like. Again, delicate, elegant, a little bit more power on the palate, it has to be said. I think this was distilled on its lees. I'm certainly getting that kind of leesy, full kind of character. There's a touch of citrus, some ginger, a little bit more oak. I'm getting a little bit more vanilla and tight sort of European oak tannins. Again, delicate, lightly oxidised apple, and a lovely minerality to it, lovely fresh mineral finish. Yeah, I like that. I think that's really, really impressive. And like I said, it perfectly encapsulates my idea of the terroir of Finois, and what Finois generally has a tendency to say to me, and that just expresses it absolutely wonderfully.
keep my
Right, okay, so let's move on to Le Laurier de Apollon. This is bottled slightly differently, not 40%, this is 42.2%, and like I said, this is 8 years old and comes from the Petit Champagne. Now, straight off, it's a completely different nose. It is weightier, it's more intense. It's actually got quite a whiskey-like character. It's got a dried fruit. There's a bit of orange, baked apple, touch of herbal spice, more honey, thicker, denser. But again, it's got a lovely elegance to it. There's a lightness there, and although it is slightly more about the oxidised character, it's not overly oxidised, because at the end of the day it's only 8 years old, so in relative terms it's pretty young. But that's absolutely gorgeous. I mean, you know, if you are a whiskey drinker and you've never dipped your toe into cognac, this is the place for you to start, because you know it's almost kind of like crossing over into sort of whiskey-like territory. Absolutely gorgeous. See what it smells like. Rich, dense, again whiskey-like. Now I know this is distilled on the lees, which will aid that sort of richness. Again, citrus, a touch of orange, apricot, a little nuttiness, a touch of vanilla. Again, classic tight-grained French oak. Little minerality. Again, it's kind of blending together, sort of like a minerality and the sort of the power of the Petit Champagne region, but it's not lost its elegance at all. It really is absolutely gorgeous. So really nice.
again. Where did you go?
Right, okay, so let's move on to the Iris Poivre, or peppered iris. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Again, very different to the previous two. Quite powerful, aromatic. Violets, bit of heather possibly, or sort of scrubby, sort of heathery-ish sort of notes. I mean, it's 12 years old, so yes, there is a little bit of the oxidised fruit kind of character that you would expect, but again, it's kind of nicely sort of sat in the background, and it's allowing the sort of like the floral, aromatic borderies characteristics to sort of just absolutely shine. Touch of earth, a little bit of tannin. I mean, that again is just a gorgeous nose, really, really indicative of the region. See what it smells like. Rich, dense, quite substantial, but aromatic. Again, touch of violets, touch of dried fruit. I mean, if memory serves me correct, I think the Borderies region tends to have fairly sort of clay soils, if memory serves me correct, and it just reminds me of that kind of weightiness, that sort of, I wouldn't say a clayey kind of character, but if you kind of get what I'm getting at, it's got quite a sort of like a density, and but it's wonderfully elegant. It's really long and earthy, violety, juicy. I mean, that the finish is just absolutely sublime, and again, it just says borderese to me. It's just, and I think it just captured it absolutely wonderfully. Really, really good cognac.
Spinning like a circle and I keep walking outside.
Right, okay, so let's move on to the Cèdre Blanc. So back to the Finois, and this is 22 years old. Let's see what the nose group is on this end. Elegant, more dried fruit and baked apple, and oak, touch of cinnamon, wonderfully spicy. It's certainly showing quite a powerful character, given how long it's been aged. I'm not quite getting so much of the minerality, although there is a little element of freshness right in the background. And actually, the more you sniff it, the more that sort of minerality does become noticeable. And it is just again a lovely blending together of the oxidation character and the terroir. And like I said to you, you know, I think if this is starting to get into 30, 40 years old kind of territory, you're then starting to sort of lose some of that minerality, and the emphasis will start to shift on to the oxidised fruit character. I mean, that is just absolutely gorgeous. Wonderful depth and complexity. A little bit of almost cigar leaf, touch of pepper possibly. I mean, elegant. Absolutely gorgeous. Let's see what the palate's like. Oh God, that finish is incredible. Oh, that's really minerally, and it's kind of a real battle between this intense austere minerality and dried fruit, and my mouth is watering, and it is just, oh God, that is just incredibly good. I mean, it kicks off with more of the oxidised fruit, sort of the mature oak, sort of spices, and the sort of minerality kind of creeps in, so you can feel it coming in on the mid palate, and then bang, that finish is just wow. I mean, that is really intense. That's just stunning. I mean, that is just the right amount of maturity, the right amount of dried fruit, the right amount of terroir, minerality, and it's, yeah, I honestly, I mean, I don't get to taste very many cognacs because our cognac selection doesn't change very much. It's been pretty much set in stone ever since I've been there. We've occasionally sort of brought in one or other cognacs, but essentially it's stayed pretty much the same, because the ones we do are brilliant, and you guys that come and buy them just love to buy them. So, you know, it's not very often I come across a cognac that really sort of makes me just go, wow, I've got to stock that, got to sell that, because it is different. And like I said, it all goes back to the, you know, cognac is cognac, it's tradition, yada yada yada, not a lot going on. And then suddenly along comes a cognac producer that I wouldn't say is breaking the mould, but is just, you know, doing something a little different, pushing it in a different direction. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Right, okay, so let's just finish off with the two Pineau de Charentes. So this is the white. This is the Colibri Charmat, 100% Uni Blanc. Let's see what the nose goes. Rich, grapey, honeyed, leesy, and when I say honeyed, I mean that sort of thick set kind of honey, rather than sort of runny honey. It's that kind of sort of crystallised thick set honey. Some vanilla, a little musky note, a touch of oxidised fruit. Yeah, that's lovely Pinot. Really, really nice. See what the past like. Sweet, honeyed, grapey, slightly floral, touch of cinnamon, lovely length, lovely Pinot. That's really, really nice, and not particularly expensive either.
I can't get you off my mind. It's spinning like a circle.
Right, okay, so on to the Merlot. This is the Colibri de Fanny. Let's see what that gives us on this. Again, grapey, earthy, red currants, berry, vanilla. It's almost kind of biscuity note happening. That is really nice. I really like that. I love the combination of that sort of biscuity, almost slightly minerally kind of note, and the red fruit. It kind of really appealing. Works quite nicely. See what that's like. Quite sweet, a little syrupy, I must admit, but lots of juicy red fruits, red currant, berries, little appley note, touch of minerals. Again, really nicely balanced. I think the ABV is about right. I personally would have just upped it a little bit more on this particular bottling, just to offset the that slight syrupy sweetness. I think it could have just done with a little bit more alcohol. But again, really enjoyable. So yeah, good stuff.
And maybe if I put up a fight,
Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show up. Barbie's back. Right, okay, so a big thank you to Highball Brands and to Fanny Fougerat for the samples for today's episode of the show. Really appreciate that, and I think it was a really great tasting. I loved the Petit Cigue, the VSOP. I mean, it just shouted fin boire at me, it has to be said. And I think if you are into your characterful spirits, then, you know, and it's not that expensive. I forget what it's on the shelf at, but it's not hugely expensive, and it's just an absolutely lovely cognac. The Laurier de Apollon, again, like I said, it's just very indicative of the Petit Champagne region. Wonderfully balanced, a little bit more power, and this is, I guess, the thing with Fanny's range, is that they are all individual. Each bottling is individual and distinctive and slightly different. Whereas with obviously some producers, you're essentially tasting, I wouldn't say quite exactly the same spirit, but just at a different point in its evolution. But there is obviously a house style that will run through their cognacs, and to a certain extent, you know, you taste the VS, the VSOP, the XO, and you can see the progression of the spirit. And what I love about Fanny's bottlings are that each bottling is a unique and individual entity in its own right. It's not like a continuity of a theme, shall we say. And the Irish Provier, again, I mean, encapsulated the Borderies region as far as I'm concerned. Again, different, slightly more floral, richer. You could almost taste the sort of the clay soil, that, you know, intensity. Just absolutely fantastic. And the Cedre Blanc, I mean, again, just absolutely bottled at the right time. Not too much oxidised character to sort of swamp the minerality of the fin boire. Just, again, really well balanced. And the two Pinots, I mean, yeah, there's nothing particularly different or interesting. Well, no, interesting, that's wrong. Nothing particularly sort of different about them, apart from the fact that they are just really nice Pinots. And, you know, if you like that kind of style of wine, then they're great. So, but the cognacs are the absolute star, and I honestly think that these are certainly worth having a look at if you're into cognac. So yeah, there you go. That's this week's episode of the show in the bag. Like I said, at the weekend I will be doing the Christmas episode, so I will have accoutrements while we're in France, I suppose. Let's talk French. So anyway, until then, good afternoon and good dramming.
Maybe if I touched you right, maybe I could put up a fight. Baby, did I hold you too